before the first sunrise, before the first breath of wind moved across the earth, before any human eye had ever opened to see a single star in the sky, there was a war. Not a war between nations, not a battle fought with swords or spears on dusty ground. This was something far greater, far more terrifying, a war that shook the very foundations of heaven itself. And at the center of it all was one of the most beautiful, most powerful, most gifted beings God had ever created. This is that story. And trust me, once you hear it, you will never look at the world the same way again. If this kind of deep, powerful Bible storytelling speaks to your soul, take a moment right now to subscribe and turn on notifications. There is so much more where this comes from, and you do not want to miss what is coming next. Now let's go back, all the way back, to a time before time had a name. In the beginning, there was only God, and God, in his infinite love and creativity, did not want to exist alone. So he created. He spoke light into places that had never known light. He shaped beauty from nothing. And among the most magnificent things he created were the angels. These were not little winged creatures sitting on clouds playing harps. No, the angels were powerful, blazing, breathtaking beings. Beings of fire and light. Beings of immense intelligence and strength. They surrounded the throne of God and filled the heavens with praise. Every single one of them had been made with purpose, with beauty, and with an extraordinary ability to reflect the glory of their Creator. But among all of these angels, there was one who stood above the rest. His name, in the ancient texts, was Lucifer, and his name meant something beautiful, the morning star, the son of the dawn. Imagine the most stunning sunrise you have ever seen, when the sky turns from deep midnight blue into a breathtaking explosion of gold and rose and light. That first piercing star that you can see just before the full sun rises, that was what Lucifer was meant to be, the herald of glory, the one who announced the coming of something magnificent. He was described as being covered in precious stones, sardius, topaz, diamond, emerald, every color, every brilliance. The prophet Ezekiel says he was the seal of perfection, full of wisdom, perfect in beauty. He was placed on the holy mountain of God. He walked among the stones of fire. And not only was he beautiful, he was talented. He was gifted with music in a way no other angel was. The book of Ezekiel describes the sound of his very being. Pipes and drums and instruments were part of how he was made. When Lucifer moved through the courts of heaven, music moved with him. When he raised his voice, it was not just singing, it was worship that filled every corner of eternity. He was, without question, the crown jewel of God's angelic creation. And here's where the story takes its first dark turn. Because the very things that made Lucifer magnificent became the things that brought about his downfall. Beauty, wisdom, power, gifting. These are wonderful things when they point you toward God. But when they begin to point you toward yourself, something shifts. Something breaks. The Bible tells us that Lucifer's heart began to change. Not all at once. These things never happen all at once. It was slow, quiet, like a crack that begins at the edge of a mirror and creeps, inch by inch, until one day the whole thing shatters. He began to look at himself, and then he kept looking, and then he could not stop. He saw his beauty, and he called it his own. He felt his power, and he decided it belonged to him. He heard the music that poured from his being, and he forgot that it had been given to him as a gift. He began to think, I made this. I am this. I deserve more than just to serve. And then came the 5 most dangerous words ever spoken in all of eternity. The book of Isaiah records them for us. Lucifer said, and feel the weight of each word, I will ascend to heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the mount of the assembly. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. And then the final word, the one that changed everything forever. I will be like the Most High. 5 times he said, I will. 5 declarations of pride. 5 moments where a created being looked at his creator and said, I do not want to worship you anymore. I want to be you. This is the moment the crack became a fracture, and the fracture became a war. Because Lucifer did not keep these thoughts to himself. He could have. But pride never stays quiet for long. Pride needs an audience. Pride needs followers. Pride wants to be seen and agreed with and celebrated. And so Lucifer began to move through the courts of heaven with a different kind of music. A whisper, a suggestion, a question. Something like, does God really deserve all of this worship? Have you ever thought about what we could be if we were not bound by serving Him? Look at what I am. Look at what we are. Should we not have more? And it worked. Not on everyone, but on enough. The book of Revelation tells us that a third of the angels, a third of all those blazing, powerful, beautiful beings chose to follow Lucifer. They listened to the whisper. They agreed with the pride. They turned their faces away from the throne of God and toward the voice of the one who called himself their new leader. And here is something that should stop you in your tracks. These were not weak angels. These were not confused, small, insignificant beings who did not know any better. These were angels who had been in the direct presence of God, who had seen His face, who had heard His voice, who had experienced His goodness with their own eyes and with their own hearts. And they still chose pride over presence. They still chose Lucifer over the Lord. That truth alone should make every single one of us pause and think about the choices we make in our own lives. Now the heavens were divided. On one side, Lucifer and his angels, armed with rebellion and pride and the terrifying power that God had originally given them for good. On the other side, God's faithful angels, led by a warrior whose name rang out like a battle cry across the halls of eternity. His name was Michael. And the book of Revelation, chapter 12, describes what happened next in language that still sends a chill through the soul of anyone who truly reads it. And there was war in heaven. For words. But what for words? War. In heaven. We sometimes think of heaven as this perfectly still, perfectly quiet place where nothing dramatic ever happens. But that is not what the Bible shows us. The Bible shows us that heaven is a place of immense life and power, and even, in this moment, immense conflict. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. And the dragon, that is what Lucifer had now become in his heart, a beast of pride and destruction, fought back. Can you imagine what this looked like? These were not human soldiers swinging metal blades. This was light against darkness on a cosmic scale. This was the power of faithful devotion standing against the power of corrupted pride. Thunder and fire and force beyond anything the human mind can fully picture, filling the entire expanse of heaven. And Lucifer fought with everything he had. He had spent what felt like an eternity gathering strength, gathering followers, preparing for this moment. He had convinced himself that he could win. He had told himself the lie that pride always tells, that he was enough, that he was strong enough, that he was great enough, that he, who had been made by God, could overcome God himself. But here's the thing about pride. It always tells you that you are bigger than you are. And it always brings you lower than you ever imagined you could fall. Because the war ended. And when it ended, there was no question about the outcome. Lucifer lost. Michael and the faithful angels prevailed. And in one of the most dramatic moments in all of Scripture, certainly in all of spiritual history, the one who had called himself the morning star was cast out. The book of Revelation says it plainly and powerfully. He was hurled down. He and his angels were thrown out of heaven like a lightning strike. Fast, violent, final. And Jesus himself, speaking to his disciples in the book of Luke, said these words, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." Lightning, not a slow walk of shame, not a quiet exit. Like lightning, that fast, that final. The one who had stood in the most glorious place in all of creation, cast down. The one who had walked in the light of God's presence, sent into darkness. The one who had been given every gift, every beauty, every honor, stripped of his place and removed from the courts of the Most High. And as he fell, the music that once moved with him must have become something unrecognizable. What was created for worship had been twisted into warfare. What was meant to glorify had been used to rebel, and now it was gone. Not because God took it in cruelty, but because Lucifer had chosen to use it against the very one who gave it. That is what sin does. That is what pride does. It does not just hurt you. It transforms you. It takes the best things inside you and corrupts them into something unrecognizable. Now here is where the story deepens. Because what happens next is the part that affects every single one of us directly. Lucifer, now called Satan, which means the adversary, the one who opposes, does not give up. He cannot return to heaven. That door has been closed. But he has not stopped fighting. He has simply changed his battlefield. And God had just created something new, something precious, something made not from fire and light like the angels, but from dust and breath. Something given a garden home and a breathtaking invitation to walk in friendship with the Creator of all things. Humanity, you and me, and Satan, thrown down from glory, burning with bitterness and loss, looked at this new creation and saw an opportunity. If he could not wound God directly, and he could not because God is beyond being wounded, then perhaps he could wound the thing God loved. Perhaps he could take these small, beautiful, dust and breath creatures and turn them against their maker the same way he had once turned a third of heaven. And so he came into the garden, quiet, clever, with a question that sounds almost exactly like the one he whispered to the angels. Did God really say? The same spirit, the same strategy. A question designed to make you doubt the goodness and the truth of God. And in that garden, we know what happened. The first man and woman listened to the whisper, and the fracture that had begun in heaven found its way into the human heart. But, and this is the part you must not miss, the story did not end there. Because God, in his love, did not walk away from his creation the way Lucifer walked away from his purpose. God did not give up on the beings he made from dust and breath and the warmth of his own hands. He made a promise, right there, in the middle of the grief and the brokenness and the consequences of that first act of rebellion. God looked at the serpent, at the one who had brought this destruction into his beloved garden, and he said these words, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." This is known as the first gospel, the first announcement of rescue. Before Moses, before David, before any prophet had spoken a single word. Right there at the very beginning, when everything seemed to be falling apart, God was already announcing the plan. There would come one, born of a woman, and though the serpent would wound him, and oh, how he would try, that one would deliver the final, crushing blow to the head of the ancient enemy. Centuries passed. Generations came and went. The story of humanity unfolded, full of beauty and heartbreak, and striving and falling and reaching for something better. And through it all, the enemy worked. He whispered. He accused. He twisted. He destroyed when he could. He deceived when he could. Because of being cast out of heaven does not become peaceful. He becomes desperate, and desperate beings with immense power are capable of immense destruction. But then, in the fullness of time, as the Apostle Paul writes, God sent his Son, born not in a palace, not in a throne room, born in the humblest of places, to the quietest kind of beginning, not announced with an army, but with a song, angels singing over a hillside to shepherds who had no idea they were about to witness the arrival of the answer to everything. Jesus came, and from the very beginning, the enemy recognized him. In the wilderness, Satan tried the same three temptations he always uses: comfort, pride, and power. Take what you want. Prove yourself. Bow to me, and I will give you everything. But Jesus did not listen to the whisper. Jesus knew what was being offered, and more importantly, he knew who was offering it. And he answered each temptation with the word of God, steady and unshaken. The enemy left, defeated again, but not finished. Because Satan thought he had found his moment at the cross. He had stirred up the crowds. He had entered the heart of a betrayer. He had done everything in his corrupted power to make sure Jesus ended up on that hill, nailed to those beams, bleeding and dying in front of the people who had hoped he was the one. And as Jesus took his final breath, you can almost hear the ancient pride stirring again in the enemy's heart. Is this it? Did I win? Is this how the story ends? But it was not how the story ended. 3 days later, the stone rolled away. Not because someone moved it, but because what was inside could no longer be contained by death. Jesus rose, alive, glorified, and in that moment, the head of the serpent was crushed, exactly as God had promised in the garden on that grief-filled day when everything seemed lost. The book of Colossians says that through the cross, Jesus disarmed the powers and authorities and made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them. The war that began in heaven, the war of pride against love, of self-will against surrender, of the created rising up against the Creator, found its decisive answer not in lightning or fire or the clash of angelic armies, but in the quiet, devastating, world-changing sacrifice of a Son who loved you enough to go all the way. The book of Revelation, looking forward to the final chapter of all things, shows us the complete picture. It tells us that the accuser of the brothers and sisters, the one who stood and pointed at every failure, every weakness, every mistake in the lives of God's people, has been overcome. Not just defeated in a battle, overcome by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. That means your story matters in this. Your faith matters. Your choice to say yes to God, even when the whispers say no, that is part of the ongoing answer to the war that began before the world was formed. And one day, the Bible is clear about this, the war will reach its absolute final end. The enemy who fell like lightning from heaven will face his ultimate judgment. The book of Revelation describes it, a lake of fire prepared for the devil and his angels. The place that was never meant for humanity, which is why the invitation of the gospel is so urgent, so beautiful, so filled with love. God does not want anyone to be lost in what was prepared for the rebellious. He wants every dust and breath creature he lovingly formed to come home. Now, if you have stayed with this story all the way to this moment, I want you to do something simple. If this video has spoken to your heart, if this story has given you something to think about, something to hold on to, something to share, like this video right now, leave a comment below telling me what part of this story moved you the most, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. The story you just heard is not just history. It is living and breathing and speaking into the world right now. So here's what this story leaves us with. Here is the reflection that matters. Lucifer had everything: beauty, wisdom, power, position, the direct presence of God. And he chose himself. He chose pride. He chose the 5 dangerous words, I will be like the Most High, and it took him from glory to ruin in one devastating moment. We make small versions of that same choice every day. Every time we trust our own understanding more than God's. Every time we decide we know better. Every time we let pride close our ears to wisdom or bitterness harden our hearts against love. The good news, the breathtaking, world-shaking, eternity-altering good news, is that the same God who cast out the rebel from heaven ran toward the rebels on earth with open arms. That is the difference between the enemy and the Father. The enemy wanted your destruction. The Father wanted your restoration. You were never meant to be a casualty of this war. You were meant to be a child who comes home. The war in heaven changed everything, but the cross of Jesus changed everything back. And that is a story worth holding on to. With everything you have,